In this video, I'll give you my predictions for UFC Vegas 86. We're going to go through the entire card from top down, so make sure you watch until the end. As always, you can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. Fourth event of the year, and Kunith hasn't missed an upload. Hold up, let him cook. At the very top of the card, we have a Joe Pyfer main event for the first time in the UFC. He fights the Joker, Jack Hermansson, this week. And Jack Hermansson's getting up there in age, man, 35 years old. He's been in the UFC for nearly a decade now, and he's fought some of the best middleweights along the way, like prime Thiago Santos, Gerald Meerschaert, Jacare Souza, Marvin Vettori, Cannonier, Gastelum, Sean Strickland, Roman Dolidze. He's fought the who's who, and what you're always going to get from Jackie Boy is good movement, output, toughness, and a tricky submission game. At 185 pounds, he is firmly in that gatekeeper role, and he plays it well. On the other side, we have a young, hungry, surging Joe Pyfer, who apparently punches harder than Francis Ngannou. Can't believe everything you see on the internet. He does have serious punching power, however, and we've seen it in his UFC run and pre-UFC. He has that touch of death, so to speak. He lands on guys, they tend to crumble, and he can wrestle effectively as well. We saw that last time out against Abdul Razak Al Hassan, where he was able to take him down repeatedly and then submit him in the second round. Clearly, he's overwhelming his opponents right now with his size, his strength, his power, and his overall presence. We've seen that serve him well throughout his career. Where we haven't seen him yet is dragged into deep water, having to fight through adversity, having to fight from behind. So for me, when you consider that there's 5 rounds on tap, you have to have just some lingering concerns about his cardio and what he's going to look like late into this fight. And I'm not saying he has bad cardio. I'm not saying he can't fight from behind. I'm just saying we haven't really seen it yet. This may be the fight where we finally see it. Hermansson's been knocked out in the UFC before. Jared Cannonier caught him, Thiago Santos caught him, and those are some of the biggest punchers in the division. I think Joe Pyfer is cut from that same cloth. We even saw Marvin Vettori drop him in their fight, and he's not necessarily known for his power. So an early knockout win is really on the table for Joe Pyfer this week. He adds another knockout to his resume. But there are a few things we can't ignore. We can't ignore that this is a huge step up in competition, that it's his first main event in the UFC, that it's his first 5-round fight in his career, and he's fighting a guy in Jack Hermansson who has been here before. He's fought 5 rounds against Marvin Vettori, went the distance. Sean Strickland went the distance. Jacare Souza went the distance. You're talking about elite fighters in the division, so when you couple his experience with the level of competition, it's way beyond what Joe Pyfer has done and seen in his career. On top of all that, there's also one fight that stands out to me that makes me feel like there's a lot of value on the underdog, and that was his fight against Chris Curtis. Jack Hermansson was a ghost in there that night, floating from side to side, playing with angles, fading back after landing strikes of his own. It was a masterpiece and his most complete striking performance that we've seen to date. That style of fight from the Joker would beat Joe Pyfer. Now, I think that Joe Pyfer has a 10-minute window. A few weeks ago, we said the same thing about Mayra Bueno Silva, but for submission. She had a 10-minute window to get it done. She gassed out after that. Raquel Pennington took over, won the fight. I feel similarly about Joe Pyfer here, where if he is going to win, it's going to be in the first or second round. I think after we escape round 2, there's no chance that he gets it done. Now, can he catch him in the first 10 minutes? Of course. But Jack Hermansson might have a lot of success moving around the outside, staying on his bike, especially because we know that Joe Pyfer's not going to try to take him down. Yes, he leaned on his wrestling last time out, but taking down Hermansson's going to be a bad idea. He's all kinds of trouble on the mat, and he's only been taken down once in nearly 6 years. So I don't think that Hermansson needs to worry about Pyfer using all of the tools at his disposal, really mixing the martial arts. I think he's going to throw a lot of hard punches, and again, he's got a couple minutes to get it done. I like the value on the underdog here. He's more proven. He has more ways to win, I feel. Theoretically, he has better cardio, and frankly, he has shared the octagon with better fighters on a handful of occasions. Yes, again, I know that Joe Pyfer early knockout is the most likely scenario here, but the most likely scenario doesn't always materialize. Give me the Joker to finish this one late. The pick for me in this fight is Jack Hermansson inside the distance. Next, we have our co-main event. What I'd like to do is tell you 2 truths and a lie, and you could decide which is which. First is that this fight will be extremely close and a split decision is on the table. Second is that the winner of this fight is going to be the one that moves forward a bit more and the one that gets takedowns. Third is that Oscar's in really good shape. Pretty obvious how this one goes down in my opinion. 2 guys that are super tough in Dan Ige and Andre Fili. They're nearly identical when it comes to the amount of offense that they put out there. And this fight likely goes the distance. Now for Dan Ige, Ige, I give him the edge in punching power, but not by much. I also give him the edge in competition. His losses in the UFC outside of his debut to Julio Arce have been against guys who have either fought for the belt or are in that conversation. Everybody else he beats. But with that being said, I think that Andre Fili falls in that everybody else kind of bucket. Where Fili has some advantages is first his size. He should be able to use his length to stay on the outside, land when Ige can't. Also his wrestling. I think the biggest hole in Dan Ige's game is his takedown defense, which sits close to 50%. He goes down easier than a Crunchwrap Supreme, and we've seen Andre Fili lean on his wrestling in the past. He's also done it for so long. He's fighting out of a good camp, so you can rest assured if you're a Fili supporter this week that they're going to come in with a good game plan at the very least. What we can expect from this fight, in my opinion, is a lot of boxing. Neither of these guys are known for their leg kicks. It's going to be tit for tat, back and forth from start to finish, and again, a split decision is definitely in the cards here. And going back-to-back underdogs to start the breakdown seems a little risky. Evidence of that is not one of you last week for the challenge picked 2 winning underdogs in the comments. Not so easy, is it? But I do like the dog here for the reasons that I listed. Close fight, could go either way, but I think the one who wins is going to be the guy who's getting more takedowns and moving forward a bit more often. I'm warning you now to expect a greasy decision here just because the fight's going to be close. The judges are probably going to get it wrong like they did with that joke of a scorecard reading at the end of the Landon Quinones fight last week. That was ridiculous. But anyway, I feel Andre Fili wins this fight. I think he wins by decision. Next, we're looking at Ihor Potieria versus Robert Bryczek. Potieria is stepping in on very short notice, and apparently this fight is at middleweight. I'm going to try not to make that a bigger deal than it is because Ihor Potieria has fought at 185 before, and when he's weighing in for these light heavyweight bouts in the UFC, he's coming in under 205 more often than not, so I don't think it's a big deal. But Robert Bryczek is making his UFC debut. I went back and watched a few of his fights, and dog, let me tell you, this guy's going to have a lot of fun fights in the UFC for however long his career is because he gets in a low stance, he moves forward, he's chucking bombs. It's like those moments when you watch Michael Chandler fight, it's like late in the second, late in the third round, and he just lets it all hang out. That's how this guy fights from the opening bell. So against higher level fighters in the UFC, he's going to live and die by that. He's going to get caught a couple of times. He's going to get knocked out a couple of times at the highest level. I can assure you of that. He's either going to get knocked out or he's going to pick up a knockout win for himself early in most of his fights. Against Potieria, he's playing with fire a bit. Potieria has potential to be very sharp, and he might catch Bryczek this week. That would not surprise me one bit. And with a better, longer camp, more time to prepare for this guy, I think that the odds would be a lot tighter than what they're going to end up being, and I think he'd have a much better chance of winning. But I do think that this is a great situation for Bryczek, considering everything that comes along with it. I don't think that Ihor is going to be able to eat the offense coming back his way. Potieria is coming off of back-to-back knockout losses. He's stepping in on short notice. Again, the weight cut is not a huge deal to me, but if it ever was going to be a big deal, it's going to be in this one. So coming down a weight class on short notice against a power puncher who was slated to be here, preparing to be here, he's going to be throwing hammers from the opening bell all the way until 3 minutes in when one of them is looking up at the lights. But I like Robert Bryczek to make good on his UFC debut and pick up a knockout win. Next, we have Brad Tavares taking on our 44th president. Gregory Robocop Rodrigues showed us in his last fight that he can do something that most fighters cannot, which is take the path of least resistance. Clap it up. It was amazing to look at a fighter say, here's this matchup with a guy who throws really hard but doesn't have great takedown defense. You know what? Instead of standing on the feet with him, instead of trading at range and giving him an opportunity to win the fight, let me just take him down right away. Let me lean on my strengths. Let me play my game so that I can pick up a win. He ends up smashing Dennis Talul in the way that Stone Cold Steve Austin would smash two brewskis together, gets it done early and looks damn good. If you've been watching the UFC for the last couple of years, it's impossible to not be a fan of Gregory Rodrigues because the dude has all the tools to not only win fights in the UFC, but he always puts on very fun fights in the UFC. He's big, he hits like a truck, power in both hands, heart for days, and you can't coach heart. He's a phenomenal grappler, and now he's shown us that he can have an intelligent approach to these fights as well. A lot to like about Robocop, who's still learning and growing. The oldest looking 31-year-old you're gonna find, but he's still only 31. Let's go. Now on the other side, Brad Tavares is solid. That's the most I can give him, is solid. He's like a gas station turkey sandwich where he's not gonna wow you, but he's consistent and he's good enough. He's a bit of a generalist though, right? Like he's going to strike, but he's not an elite striker. He can wrestle, but it's mostly defensively, and he's got good cardio, but it's not like he's turning it up in the third round and finishing these fights late. He's just a guy with a spot on the UFC roster who wins more fights than he loses, and that is pretty damn good if you ask me. Most of his fights go the distance. Again, a lot of that has to do with him not being an elite striker, not a ton of power, no submission game. Like there's no universe. Like the timeline that we're on or any other timelines, there's no no timeline, there's no universe, there's no dimension where he submits RoboCop. It doesn't happen. He probably doesn't even shoot for a takedown. If he doesn't cold cock Gregory Rodrigues in the first 2 minutes of this fight, which is not something he has shown us that he has the ability to do, then frankly, I don't see how he wins this fight. Like Natalia Silva last week, who was parlay fuel of the highest order, like we said on the video, and we hit that parlay with Natalia Silva and Ji Young Lee on the Kunith MMA website. And one thing I want to note is that Natalia Silva was way better than Vivi Araujo and ended up being like minus 100 or like plus 100 on the live line at one point. Craziness. Got to keep that sports book open during the fights, Papa, because things change like that. But Gregory Rodrigues, he wins this fight however he wants. If he wants to take Tavares down, he can. It's going to be hard. Tavares has good takedown defense, but I think Gregory Rodrigues could get him there. If he wants to stand and trade with him, he'll have success doing that too. I think this finishes similarly to how the Bruno Silva Brad Tavares fight went. I expect a knockout finish more than anything here. I think that Gregory Rodrigues, better everywhere, younger, more dangerous, and I think he wins this fight by knockout. And real quick, if you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm, tell me in the comments who's going to win fight of the night. Let's see if you can call it. Next, we're looking at a fight with Michael Johnson and Darrius Flowers. There's no one in the history of the UFC that knows how to lose quite like Michael the Menace. With a record of 21-19, you heard that right, at 37 years old, he's still doing it, and he faces Darrius Flowers, who's making his true UFC debut this week. I say true because last year he did fight on short notice in the UFC against Jake Matthews, bad situation. Now he comes in as a slight underdog against Michael Johnson, who has had some great wins in the UFC on his resume. You've got Edson Barbosa, Tony Ferguson, Dustin Poirier, Joe Lozon. Now those wins are old, impressive, but old. But the fact that they're so impressive, in my opinion, is what's fooling these sports books so consistently. The betting lines have been off for Michael Johnson for the last couple of years now. He has been favored in 8 of his last 11 losses.
It's free real estate.
He's now favored once again. How is anybody justifiably putting minus money on Michael Johnson, whose record is almost even? I feel like it's like Scooby-Doo, where if we got to Michael Johnson, we got close enough to him, when we pulled his head up, it would be a mask, and underneath would be Randa Marcos. And if you've watched Michael Johnson fights, you know exactly what I mean when I say that nobody can lose quite like him. He goes from winning the fight 1 minute to being knocked out or being submitted in the next. And I just don't think that the chin is there anymore. He has serious lapses in judgment in these fights, which is what's getting him caught, and now he fights a very powerful, explosive guy who's probably going to find the chin at some point. And I expect a hard swing when it comes to the money line, so get your bets in as early in the week as you can. We saw odds get ballooned up for guys like Nasruddin Imavov, Renato Moicano, Ji Young Lee last week. This was going on throughout the week, but especially on fight night, you saw those odds get juiced up. Like Ji Young Lee was minus 130 to start the week and was at minus 210 before the fight started. So I don't know if you're a Michael Johnson truther, I don't know if you're a Michael Johnson believer, but if you're not, then you might as well not miss the boat on Darrius Flowers this week. And truly, this is more of a pick against Johnson than it is for Flowers, but there are still things that I like about Flowers. We touched on the power already. Big, explosive, powerful guy. What I'm most interested to see from him, though, this week is what shape he comes into this fight in. I expect him to be in killer shape. This guy was fighting at middleweight less than 2 years ago. He also picked up 3 wins in 3 weeks at 185, so there's that. Now he's fighting at 155, and if all goes well on the scales, he's going to look huge. He's going to carry some serious pop with them, and I think that Darrius Flowers wins this fight by knockout. Next, we have a striker versus grappler matchup with Rodolfo Vieira and Armen Petrosyan, and last week I said in striker versus grappler matchups, you should go with the grappler. And then I picked Pete Rodrigues, so cage-free egg all over my face. So we should learn from our mistakes and take the grappler, right? Well, it's hard to, because Armen Petrosyan is a fantastic striker. He throws with a high clip, he lands with a high clip, great kicks, manages the distance well. His lone loss in the UFC was against Caio Borralho, where he was taken down and controlled each round. Now, can Rodolfo Vieira get Petrosyan down? Well, that's the big question here, because we have seen him use takedowns effectively in the past, and we've also seen him blank on takedown attempts in other fights. On paper, he's got a whopping 26% takedown accuracy. That's about as bad as it gets. But the numbers don't always tell the whole story. He went 1 for 7 on takedown attempts against Cody Brundage, who is a wrestler with good takedown defense. Okay. He also won that fight. Now you look at his fight with Fluffy Hernandez, who again again, is a good MMA wrestler. He went 4 for 10 on takedown attempts. What's really killing his conversion is his fight against the Action Man Chris Curtis, where he goes 0 for 20 on takedown attempts. That's absurd. But the Action Man does have elite takedown defense. Now, Armen Petrosyan has some of the worst takedown defense in the UFC. Can he stay safe on bottom, work back to his feet, fight off submissions? Sure. Probably against most fighters, but Rodolfo Vieira on his back is a whole different ball game. So while I like Petrosyan, I think the gap in grappling is way too wide, and once this fight hits the mat, I think Vieira chokes him out. I expect it to happen early. I think when Vieira's at his strongest early in this fight, when they're both at their driest, is when he's going to be able to get that submission locked in. If he doesn't, check your live lines, because what's going to happen is Armen Petrosyan's going to get taken down in round 1. Rodolfo Vieira might spend time hanging out on his back for a while, and you might see those odds swell up for Vieira. But as the fight goes on, they start to get a little slippery. Armen Petrosyan starts finding a home for that body kick. That's when the tide will turn, and I think he could knock out Rodolfo Vieira late. But I will stick with my guns here and take Rodolfo Vieira by submission, but be mindful of the live opportunity from a betting standpoint while the fight's going on. And just as a little sneak peek, Rodolfo Vieira by submission is probably going to be on the official betting article this week. If you want the official betting article, the DFS strategy guide, lineup optimizer, all these tools, you can go right to kunithmma.com, click plans, and see what works best for you. Didn't have enough Tempa Garimbo last week. On the DFS strategy guide, we said that the Garimbo Pete Rodrigues fight was a must target, one that you needed to lock into all of your lineups. We also projected Charles Johnson for very low ownership. That came to fruition. He came in at very low ownership, and he ends up beating up on Osman Moxum. Felt good about that one. Good job, Energy. You take these things, you plug them into your lineup optimizer, you play with the tools a little bit, you play with the rules a little bit, and they're able to spit out lineups that probably would have put you on the right track had you not been. Although the Aliaskhab Khizriev fight getting canceled is nightmare fuel. Crazy. But back to the breakdown. Next, we have Carlos Prates making his UFC debut against Trevin Giles, who people in the comments keep telling me I look like. Well, brother Trevin is here, and he's here to fight this week. But he's up against it. The UFC has not done this man any favors. If we just look back at some of his last few opponents, Roman Dolidze, Dricus du Plessis, Michael Morales, he gets a small drink of water against Louis Cosi, and then right back to the grindstone against Preston Parsons, and then Gabriel Bonfim. So Dana, Sean Shelby. What did my poor brother Trevin Giles do to deserve this? Now he's thrown in there with Stretch Armstrong and Carlos Prates, who's fighting out of the Fighting Nerds. They've been on a tear. As corny as the gimmick is, those guys can throw down. He's got a 78-inch reach coming into this, crazy long arms. He also has a lot of experience, which you don't see many guys making their UFC debut with as much experience, and based off of where he's fighting out of, you know that he's going to war in the gym all the time. Prates is on a long win streak, and I expect him to extend that win streak this week. I expect him to be in control of the fight. He's going to control the distance. He's going to control the pace. Trevin Giles is great at that. He's great at making guys slow down to his pace of fight. But I don't see Prates giving him the slow fight that he wants, and I think that Giles is going to have a hard time keeping up with that pace. I think that Prates is going to put a lot out there. He's going to rip to the body, and Prates is a decent favorite, and it makes complete sense. If you want to get a better line, take him by knockout. He has 12 knockouts on his record, and a very similar frame to Michael Morales, who caught Trevin Giles in round 1. So give me the Brazilian to get it done. There's a lot to like about him, especially in this matchup. I think he's better everywhere. Give me Carlos Prates to win this fight by knockout. Next, we have a fight with Bolaji Oki making his UFC debut against Damir Hadžović. Excuse the slide. That was the best picture we could find with removing the background. I know it looks like he's missing, but he's not missing. We'll know where he is on Saturday. A lot to like about Oki. He's one of those guys who lost right away as a professional fighter, and he got that L almost out of the way, and he hasn't looked back since. He's a knockout artist with solid size for the division, not too tall, but not too compact either. Now, on the other side, Damir Hadžović is being sacrificed. He's 4-5 in the UFC. None of his wins are against guys who are still in the promotion. His striking is his best weapon, but even then, he's not somebody who's a true knockout artist, especially at 37 years old. And when you look at the amount of times he's won versus the amount of times he's lost in the UFC, for how long he's been in the UFC, there's no way that he's a full-time fighter. Like, he's got to be a mailman, or at the very most a coach in a gym somewhere, because you can't lose that much. Like, he's not getting win bonuses. He hasn't fought in years. He's only got a win bonus 4 times in the UFC. So while I'm not trying to pocket watch you, Damir Hadžović, I know that you're probably slinging milk or something. Your head's not in it. You're worried about skim being next to the skim, 2% being next to the 2%. So I wonder how dedicated to his training he can be at this time. But regardless, this is an easy one, an obvious one. Don't need to take too much time on it. Bolaji Oki, younger, bigger, hits like a truck, and he's going to put Damir Hadžović out this week, first or second round. Give me Bolaji Oki to win this fight by knockout. Next, we have Loma Lookboonmee fighting Bruna, Brazil, who's looking to make it 2 straight in the UFC. She picked up her first UFC win over Shauna Bannon, undefeated prospect out of Ireland in her last fight. It was good to see her get on the right track. She managed that fight well. It was a bit of a boring decision, but she cruised to a decision win, managed her distance well, leaned on her grappling, got it done mostly with being more efficient. And I say it's nice to see her get back in the win column because we had high hopes for her coming into the UFC. She had a sick knockout on Dana White's Contender Series, but then gets knocked out, fraud-checked, most would say, against Denise Gomes. She was dominated in every aspect of the game in that fight. Striking, wrestling, aggression, everything. And now she needs to fight off Loma Lookboonmee, who actually dominated Denise Gomes. So there's a little MMA math for your stupid tiny brain. We've watched Loma Lookboonmee grow into a more complete fighter since coming into the UFC. We all know about the Muay Thai background and how good of a striker she is. But she's really leaned on her grappling in her last couple of fights, adding that necessary wrinkle into her game to be able to start to compete at a higher level within the promotion. And looking at her run in the UFC, that's pretty much what's been going on. She lost to Angela Hill and Lupi Godinez. Those are excusable losses. Both are very well rounded. Obviously, Loma Lookboonmee's not at that level yet. She could be, but she's not at that level yet. But for all of the rest, the Elise Reeds of the world, Denise Gomes, Sam Hughes, Jinyu Fry, she beats them all and she does it pretty cleanly, which I expect her to do this week. I see her doing her best work in the clinch and just breaking Bruna Brasil down as the fight goes on. You'll see there in the graphic that Brasil is a lot taller, a lot longer. I expect Loma to crash the distance, get that plumb Muay Thai clinch, and really start to break her posture. Make it hard for her to breathe, get her head facing down, throw hard knees up the middle, and of course takedowns are going to come off of that, but I expect a clean win on the scorecards for Loma Lookboonmee this week. Give me Loma Lookboonmee to win by decision. Next we have a fight. Earlier I said that you guys call me Trevin Giles. I feel like I look more like Devin Clark. Last week somebody called me Jamal Pokes, which is just crazy. That's just racism at that point, no? But you have Devin Clark and Marcin Prachnio. Both guys have been swapping wins and losses in the UFC recently, and I would say they're for very different reasons. For Devin Clark, he's 8-8 in the UFC, but he's one of those guys who has found himself in a very tough road throughout the promotion. It just happens to some guys. Kennedy and Zejiku is a handful. Da Unjung being a big, powerful, athletic guy who likes to strike. Azmat Mirzakhanov, undefeated Russian. Iwan Kutelaba, who is truly radioactive. Anthony Smith, perennial contender, top of the division all the time. Alonzo Menefield, power personified. Ryan Spann, as good as it gets on his best day. Alexander Rakic, who could be wearing the belt right now had it not been for injury. And Jan Blachowicz, who did wear the belt for a short time. He's faced killers in the UFC, but with his record being 8-8, could you really blame him? Now Marcin Prachnio on the other side is swapping wins and losses because I don't think he really has a style that's going to lend itself to winning a lot of fights at the highest level. Karate type fighter who wants to point fight on the outside, not too much power, absolutely no wrestling to speak of. His wins are over William Knight, who's basically Cali Muscle, who keeps walking into cages by accident. Ike Villanueva, who's so uncoordinated that he probably commits multiple fouls in bowling. And he does have a really nice win in the UFC over Khalil Roundtree Jr., but that's one of those wins where he beat Khalil Roundtree. We were like, oh, okay, whatever. But over time, it gets better because Khalil Roundtree is now winning fights. So I don't think it's the same version that we're seeing right now. Prachnio's been dominated by grapplers. He's been knocked out by powerful strikers. And now he has to fight a guy with sneaky power and even sneakier athleticism in Devin Clark. We talked about all those tough fights that Devin Clark has had along the way. This is that drink of water. It's almost like the UFC looked at him and said, Devin, you've been a company man. You've been fighting dogs for a long time here. Let's throw you a bone, give you a matchup where you can look right on and get beyond that 500 mark. Go get your win bonus. Devin Clark wins this fight easily. He shows off his strength in the clinch. He gets takedowns. He keeps the pressure on. He gets his hand raised on the judges' scorecards. I don't think that Prachnio has enough for him. I don't think Prachnio has the power to get any respect from stopping Devin Clark to close the distance. And I think that Devin Clark, when he is in tight, is going to be throwing hard punches in the clinch as well. That's going to cause Prachnio to try everything he can to just be defensive, just survive, just hang on. Just hold on, we're going home for Marcin Prachnio. So give me Devin Clark to win this fight by decision. Next, we have fighters with a combined age of 75. Not the youngest matchup here, but both guys who are very youthful despite their age. Now, is 38 and 37 an advanced age in real life? No, but MMA years are like dog years, so it's cool to see these guys still doing it, especially at a high level. Max Griffin is a lifelong martial artist. He's going to bring it every time. He's 19 and 10, but he's only been finished once in his career. He's got good striking. He's got footwork that you can only have after being in combat sports for decades at this point, and he can wrestle effectively if he wants to. Also, he can stay safe on the mat, which I really like, especially in this fight. He's going to need to stay safe on the mat this week because Jeremiah Wells is all gas, no brakes. He does that with everything. He throws 100% power, 100% into his takedowns, and he has that real strong pressure style of jiu-jitsu. Obviously, he's very physically gifted. He knows it, and that's what his style is built around, and he's going to get great results over time by fighting that way. But last time out was one of the worst losses you will ever see, and not because he was getting dominated, not because he was knocked out cold or anything like that. It was actually the complete opposite, where he was in total control of that fight, had taken no damage, was winning every second of that fight, you could argue. He was making it look easy against Carlston Harris, and then one mistake, one lapse in judgment, leaving his neck out there for too long, which is something you would not expect from a guy who grapples at this level. I get angry talking about it if you ask the truth of it, but Carlston Harris snatches up a submission, embarrassing loss. Hopefully he wants to get back on the right track and fights a little bit smarter this week, or just fights the same but doesn't do something stupid like leave his neck out off to the side like that. And I'm sure if you asked him, he would say like, yeah, it was a mistake, I shouldn't have done that. So it's not something that, you know, we're not trying to pile on Jeremiah Wells. It's just you can't make mistakes like that in this game. Now if he fights to the best of his ability, I think this is a very winnable fight against Max Griffin, because I do think he's a better grappler. I think he's more physically powerful. I think that he throws harder strikes, but he's got to be careful because Max Griffin is super well rounded, and he's better than anybody we've seen Wells beat in the UFC. I can say that pretty confidently. We saw Wells beat Warley Alves, who hasn't looked good in years, Blood Diamond, who may not even be in the UFC anymore after going 0-3. He caught Court McGee early round 1, great win. Matt Semmelsberger was dropping him with everything he was landing, and he just gave up takedowns in crucial spots when Wells was rocked. Weird fight, and then again he pulled an all-time stunt last time out. At range, I think that Wells definitely again has more power, but Griffin should have better speed and better placement. I think it's really going to come down to if Griffin can defend takedowns, forcing Wells to strike, because if that's the case, I'm going to give Max Griffin the edge over 3 rounds. Going back to it, Wells throws with 100% power. When that happens, you tend to load up a little bit. Max Griffin, he's done it for so long. Awesome vision. He's going to be able to slide out of the way, land his counter shots effectively. He has 3-round cardio. He can mix kicks in better than Jeremiah Wells can, so I think he's got better vision. He's got a more deep bag when it comes to the striking, and I think that over the 3 rounds, he's just going to win more minutes. So I'll take my chances with the longer man, the better striker, someone with more tricks up their sleeve. Give me Max Payne Griffin to win this fight by decision. Next, we're looking at a fight that I feel pretty strongly about. I feel very confident in one side of this matchup. Zach Pauga is fighting Anthony Smith's evil twin brother, Bogdan Goskov, this week. When you look at these guys side by side, there's a few things that should immediately stand out to you. One, you've got Goskov with a lot more fights, right? He's got way more experience than Zach Pauga. If you go back and watch these fights, you could see that he throws with crazy power, to the point where the UFC was comfortable enough putting him in the cage with Volkan Oezdemir in his UFC debut. Who gets that? Goskov is not somebody you can stand with for 15 minutes. He's going to separate you from consciousness at one point if you want to play that game for too long. And if you don't have the power to answer back, then it's going to be a long night or a short night, depending how you look at it. That's my problem with Zach Pauga, is he doesn't appear to have any power at all. He went the distance with Jordan Wright. Who goes the distance with Jordan Wright? He got starched with a hook that was at half power from Muhammad Usman, who is not a knockout artist by any stretch. I think he's an athletic enough guy, a tough enough guy, and a smart enough guy to compete in MMA at a professional level, but I think that when he finds himself in a firefight against somebody like Goskov, who's not going to allow him to just hold him up against the fence like he likes to do so much, he's going to have problems. So I think that Goskov goes in there, lets his hands go, and finds the mark probably early. That's the thing too, is that I feel like you're way more likely to see a knockout in the first round than you are in the third round, because by the third round, they're tired, they're fatigued a little bit, they've been fighting for a while, and also you're kind of getting used to it, right? You get hit a couple of times, you're there, you're awake. But early in the fight, you're cold, and you can get caught. And when you get caught early, when you get caught when you're cold like that, it could be a wrap. And I think that's what happens this week. Give me Goskov to win this fight by knockout. Next, we have a fight that, again, I feel pretty strongly about this one as well. You got Haider Amel making his UFC debut against Fernie Garcia. He's had 3 opponents now, has Amel. And I mean, just look in Fernie Garcia's eyes in the graphic, man. He looks like somebody who knows he's going to be fighting an ex-MMA in a couple of weeks. 0-3 in the UFC, lost to Journey Newson in his UFC debut, which is absolutely inexcusable. He just doesn't do enough and give you enough to feel confident in his ability. Like, he's a guy who will go the whole 15 minutes with you, move around, but it's almost like a sparring match. He's not really pushing a heavy pace. It doesn't seem like there's a plan B, really. He's just in there going through the motions, fighting these guys as best as he can. Like, I don't think that there's a shortage of effort. I think it's a skill issue. Ihor Amel, undefeated, looked good coming into the UFC, didn't have a great fight on Contender Series, but if you go back and you look at some of his fights, like he does get punches around the guard pretty well. He's not afraid to let his hands go, and Fernie Garcia is going to be there to be hit. Probably a guy who's here for a good, not a long time at 33 years old, but I think he's going to come in here, try to make as much noise as possible. He's going to be taller, he's going to be longer, he's coming in on a full camp, and I mean, he was fighting Shayleon Nurdembeke, he was fighting Melsik Bagdasaryan, now he gets Fernie Garcia. Like, that's got to be a blessing. Much easier matchup for him than the other two that he had in his hands, and I think that he gets it done this week. Fernie, again, is tough enough and will move around with you for 15 minutes, so I think that Ihor Amel will win this fight by decision. Real quick, if you haven't liked the video, subscribe to the channel, comment for the algorithm, all that stuff super helpful. We're almost at 5,000 subscribers, people. Let's go. When I first started this channel, I told my friend, I said, I'm going to have 100,000 subscribers in the first 3 or 4 years of doing this. And then I realized that people in this space don't get 100,000 subscribers, but 5,000 subscribers, pretty damn good. So help me out if you can. Aori Lang, kind of like Fernie Garcia, is just a hard guy to trust because my biggest issue with him is stiffness. You see that a lot with these Eastern fighters, right? They're balls of energy, just ready to be uncorked. But as a result, you could stand pretty flat-footed. You can leave your head on the center line. You can load up a little bit. And I think that Daniel Marcos is pretty smooth. He does a lot of things pretty well. He mixes his strikes together pretty well. I think that he's going to be able to stay on the outside, use his leg kicks, and he's very good defensively. He's not somebody who's eating a whole lot of offense. He's got a lot of swagger to him, a lot of confidence to him. I don't think that he beat Davy Grant, but he's still 15-0 at the end of the day, and just seems like a very winnable fight. I think Aori Lang's biggest path to victory is finding a knockout at some point, but he's going to have to find Daniel Marcos to do that, and I think he's really going to struggle with that. Again, being flat-footed, being stiff, being tense. I don't think he's loose enough to find him, and I think that Daniel Marcos is going to float to a decision win. So give me Daniel Marcos to push it to 16-0. I think he wins by decision. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure you watch later in the week on Thursday, probably, maybe Friday, depending on if Oscar gets his head out of his ass. You'll be able to see the final picks, which is more DraftKings strategy, lineup construction, but we talk about a lot of different things on that video. So be on the lookout for that, and I will see you later. Thanks.